Hey Wire Monkeys, welcome to another episode of Let's Talk Cabling. Today, we're not talking about rumors. We're not talking about market claims. We're talking about the documents that define how our industry builds cabling and networks correctly and efficiently.
Let's talk cabling. Yeah, let's talk cabling. Copper fiber structured right. Voicing day and night. Get connected, stay connected, do it right.
Welcome to the show where we tackle the tough questions submitted by technicians, installers, project managers, estimators, IT people, even customers. We're connecting at the human level so that we can connect the world. If you're watching this on YouTube, would you mind hitting the subscribe button and the bell button to be notified when new content is being produced? If you're listening to us on the one of the audio podcast platforms, would you mind leaving us a 5-star rating? Those simple little steps helps us take on the algorithm so we can educate, encourage, and enrich the lives of people in the ICT industry. Wednesday nights, 6 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. What are you doing? You know I do a live stream on TikTok, Instagram, YouTube, LinkedIn, Facebook, and anywhere else I can figure out to send the live stream to, where you get to ask your favorite RCDD. You know I'm your favorite. Don't even try to pretend like I'm not. Your favorite RCDD. Questions on installation, design, career path questions. I answer all those questions. Whatever you have. But I can hear me. Chuck, I'm driving my truck at Wednesday nights at 6 p.m. I know when I get into an action. Breathe in. Breathe out. I record them and you can watch them at your convenience. And finally, while this show is free and will always remain free, if you find value in this content, would you click on that QR code right there? You can buy me a cup of coffee. You can even schedule a 15-minute one-on-one call with me, after hours, of course, and you can even buy Let's Talk Cabling merchandise. So today, we're going straight to the source. You've heard this before, right? I've heard it. I've said this a million times, right? The best installers go beyond the code. They follow the standards, the best practices, and manufacturer recommendations. They don't just follow the code. Well, today, we're going straight to the source. My guest today is Henry Franc. He is the chair of the TR-42 Telecommunications Cabling System Engineering Committee under ANSI. Henry, welcome back to the show, because this is your second time on the show. Welcome back, my friend.
It is. I'm waiting for my third time, so then I get the jacket.
Wait a minute. I don't even have a jacket yet. I don't have a jacket yet. I've been on 300 episodes. What's that tell you?
Yeah. And actually, a slight correction. I'm actually very thankfully the outgoing chair of the Standards Committee. So I believe in giving back just like you do. So I spent my 4 years in leadership as the chair of TIA TR-42, and just recently finished my last internal coordination meeting. So, we'll be welcoming in Cindy Montstream as the new incoming chair of TR-42, which is great because as much as I love helping people build consensus, as you know, I've got a voice that I like to share, but that's not your role as chair. Your role is to encourage that healthy consensus building. And so I'm still going to be involved with standards, still love to talk to everybody about it, but now I'm going to be a much more healthy contributor as just opposed to orchestrator, if you will. But thank you for having me on.
Well, thank you for leading the ANSI committee for, I think it was 4 years, right? 4.5 years, something like that?
Yes, sir. 4 as chair and 4 as vice chair before that.
Wow. A lot of people don't realize the time commitment that takes. And yeah. I just want to say publicly, Henry, thank you for your dedication to this industry, because it's people like you that give people like me something to talk about.
Yeah. Well, you're welcome. And I love having these conversations. So, really appreciate the opportunity.
So let's start right off. Okay. For someone who hears the ANSI standards, right? But they don't really know what that means. Can you tell us what is the ANSI standards and how do they affect the Joe Blow cable guy out there pulling cable?
Yep. So for the installer specifically, it's going to sound kind of weird. It's not directly something that the installer has to read. What we want is that the specifications, for building the project, you have your overall project need, you have the specifications how to build it, you're going to have your manufacturer's best practices and manufacturer guidelines, you're going to have industry best practices like BICSI, you're going to have your industry standards, and then your codes. They all work in a hierarchy. And so what we want to ensure for the installer is that they're using standards approved methods of design, standards approved methods of installation and construction of their core materials. And it's really having that confidence that when they do the work that's described, they're going to get the expected outcome. And that's really what makes the standards important, is that they're not like a punch list. They're not something that is going to, tick all these boxes off. Right. What it's going to do is provide the framework to make sure that the materials, the methods, the process, and the design will work such that they're installing the cabling system for a hospital or an AV system or a data center, and that when they're done, they're going to have supreme confidence that it's going to work as intended.
Yeah, I like that you said that the installer in the field does not have to read the standards. I like that you said that, and you're probably wondering, well, Chuck's why is Chuck saying that? Because I've read both the code book and the standards. And it's a lot easier to read the standards than it is to read the code book. A lot easier. And the reason I like what you said that is because as long as the information that you're reading is current, for example, I don't know if Annixter still does this or not, but Annixter used to put out these little pamphlets, one for each of the standards. And you can go through it, and it told you all the important things you needed to know as an installer in the field. And then also same thing, you mentioned best practice manuals, like the ITSA manual and the TDM manual. 99% of the stuff referenced in that book is directly from the standards. So if you read those books, you are in fact reading the standards. You just don't realize it. So let me ask you this. What makes the difference between the ANSI standards and the NEC?
So natively, things like the NEC are codes, so they're enforceable by law. Theoretically, standards are voluntary. So people will always make that nuance and say, hey, wait a minute, I have to follow the NEC or else there's legal consequences from the authority having jurisdiction. But if standards aren't a code, if standards aren't a law and they're voluntary, why do I care about following them? Absolutely fantastic question. They are voluntary, and so in my role as TIA chair or a member of TIA, I'll say, hey, it's voluntary whether or not you adhere to them. But there's a catch in that. Chuck, have you ever done a cabling job where there isn't a contract involved and a specification?
Very rarely.
So, in that specification, in that scope of work, is always detailed, thou shalt, you shall do something or you should do something. Shall is mandatory, should is optional. And it will tell you, it's like, you shall put in single mode fiber as per 568. Category 6A as per 568, a different version of it. So even though it is not a law per se, because it's in your contract, which is a legal document, because it's making a normative reference, you shall follow BICSI or you shall follow TIA or any other document like a manufacturer's guideline, then it is enforceable by law, and that's the part that gets overlooked.
Right. Sometimes you'll find in the contracts, a lot of people miss the whole should, shall, may, and must thing. A lot of people miss that, and I've talked about that before. But a lot of people miss it, especially in the contracts. Sometimes you will find the actual verbiage that says the work will meet and or exceed the current ANSI and BICSI best practices. Correct. Now, contractually, you're obligated to follow that standard. But the problem is, if you violate that, that's contractual law, not civil law. So just kind of compare and contrast for a second. Absolutely. If you don't install a fire stop system correctly, you're violating the code. You could literally find yourself in court and maybe even jail or prison, especially if somebody got hurt or injured from lack of doing that action. But if you don't follow the standards, that's contractual law. Now, typically, the tech out in the field they're not going to get the proverbial hand slap, but the company will. The company's they're going to get slapped by the judge, and the judge is going to make them go back and put it incorrectly. And that's the thing. I've got another scenario where standards no longer is voluntary. And I've come across this because I teach a lot of contractors over the last 14 years. I actually did the math one time, and it's like 23,000, 24,000 people since I've been doing this. So I meet a lot of people, and then all the Bixie conferences I go to, right? I meet a lot of people. I know some contractors out there that it is their standard operating procedure to install per the ANSI and the best practices, Bixie best practices. In that scenario, you have to follow it, even if you don't have a contract that says that.
Yeah, and going back to what you said earlier, you talked about Wesco and Annixter and how they publish those handbooks. Those are amazing resources. So just because I said, the technician doesn't have to read the standards, what I meant by that, and maybe I should have been more clear, is you don't need to carry all these binders with you. But I do encourage you to have access to the handbooks, access to it through a company resource, access it through one of your partner organizations. I have that happen all the time. Somebody will say, hey, I'm having a contractual issue where somebody says, I have to follow standard XYZ under clause 1, 2, 3.
Right.
And can you help me navigate that? And, as their supplier partner, I'm glad to do that. And the larger organizations will have that native capability.
The thing that I will point out about following the Annixter or the Wesco guidelines, and they're not the only ones that do that, by the way. There's lots of them out there, but just make sure that whatever pamphlet you have is referencing the most current version of the standards. Because I've come across them before where they'd be like on the B standards. I'm like, whoa, wait a minute. We haven't been in the B standards for quite a few years.
Yeah.
So just make sure that whatever one you're reading, it does reference the most current version of the standards. Which, hey, that's a great question. What is the most current version of the standards?
You know what? It depends on the version. So if people, and the way to find that out is you can go to whatever the standards body is. So if it's TIA standards and bulletins, you can go to the TIA website and find that out. Or if it's ISO IEC for their standards, Bixie for their standards, they will have the most current list. And what we normally do in TIA and ANSI, and as well as ISO IEC for their standards, is we drop the revision number. So, for example, we are working on 568.F. So it's important for us to know which version we're working on. But when somebody specifies that for use in a specification, we generally recommend them just say, hey, we're referencing 568.1. And then put the note in there that all references are the most current, including all addenda, so that way things are caught. And you're always keeping pace on technology. And there's some weird exceptions that go through that. Like I remember when we started with Cat 6A cable many, many years ago, and OM4 many, many years ago, there was some weird things where these standards weren't necessarily in sync. And so you'll list an exception, and you'll list a dated reference. And that's only important when you want to manage the exceptions. So that's kind of what I recommend everybody do, is leave off the version number and use the most current, but check with the standards making organization to make sure that you have the most current one.
Yeah, and the standards are just like the NEC. They're just like the best practice manuals. A company or even an individual can purchase a copy of the standard. I've got a set. I was showing him, you probably weren't looking at the screen, but I was actually showing my copy that I have here. You can have a copy of the standards. It's not like it's, it's in Greek, so only a few people know how to read it. It's anybody can buy the standards and read them. They're not cheap, but they're worth having because it has helped solve a lot of arguments between me and people. Because somebody will get taught something, and maybe they might get taught wrong, and they'll quote something, and I'm like, that's not right. It's this. And go, oh, no, it's not. So then I'll do is I will literally crack open my standards and say, okay, on 4.3.27, page whatever, it says, and I quote, blah, 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 blah. And then it'll come back and go, oh, okay, well, I guess I wasn't the most current version. So because contractually it can cause you a lot of problems if you do the wrong thing, if you follow the wrong thing. So look, let me ask you this, Henry. What's TR-42? What the heck's, why is it 42? And what is the responsibility for that group when it comes to our world, structured cabling?
So I don't even know what TR stands for. It goes back to hallowed antiquity, kind of like BICSI. BICSI used to be an acronym that we for those people like you and I that have a lot of gray hair will remember what the acronym meant. But now BICSI is just BICSI. So TR is just TR. It's the numbering scheme for a committee, an engineering committee. And so there's different ones, like there's TR-48. TR-8, TR-14, TR-41, TR-42. They're different engineering committees that have a different scope. So there is microwave systems, there's towers, there's wireless. In our case, TR-42 is for premises telecommunication systems. So the way it's organized is sort of media, methods, and specific use cases. So the media is your fiber, your copper, and by copper, there's multiple medias now. There's the four-paired balanced twisted pair, as well as things like single pair Ethernet, coaxial, all covered in the copper sections. There's the fiber sections on media. Then there's the methods, which are, how you do generic cabling, how you do things like administration, bonding and grounding, pathways and spaces. We have a whole subcommittee based on just terms and definitions to make sure that we're experts around the same table, speaking the same language, because otherwise it can get confusing. And then last but not least are the use cases, whether that's commercial offices, healthcare, data centers, things of that nature.
Gotcha. So let me ask you this, because I've wanted this myself. How are the standards actually written? I mean, how do they decide who gets part of the committee, and how they decide what gets put into it? Is it just they just throw stuff at the wall and see what sticks? How do they figure out what gets put into the standards?
No, it's actually like, that wheel that you have that you spin around at the country fair and you win a prize. We just put random stuff on there and get it done. I actually wish it was that easy. It is a consensus process. So, please ignore my levity, because, sometimes when you said you just throw things at the wall, honestly, early on in some of the standards, that's what we do. We throw things on the wall because at least the way I manage my meetings, because it's about consensus, right? So you get a bunch of industry experts together and you have to agree on all the technical requirements. So what that means is you can't have a standard with a member company of the standards organization having a material technical disagreement. You have to do everything possible to resolve that. And that's, different organizations have different rules. So somebody that's managed by ANSI, it's very prescriptive of how you do that. So, if Henry doesn't want something in a standard or wants something in a standard, they have to make every effort to do it, but it's not a matter of me stamping my foot or smashing my fist and getting things done. So you have to make every reasonable effort. There's also a requirement for public input. That's the way ANSI does their standards. So whether that's an ANSI standard written by TIA or an ANSI standard written by BICSI or an ANSI standard written by anybody else. And different organizations have different rules. So for example, ISO IEC, it's one vote per company, per country. For TIA, it's one vote per company. And for other organizations like IEEE, it's one vote per individual. So that's something that a lot of people don't know about IEEE, is that it's individual contributors, not corporate or countries.
So do they have representation from every facet of the industry? I mean, do they have contractors on it? Do they have consultants on it? Do they have manufacturers? My fear is if you get two manufacturers on a committee who's writing standards that people have to follow, they're going to try to write their products into that standards.
Absolutely. And that's why you have to have that healthy contention, that push-pull contention. So we have a number of systems integrators. TIA, specifically TR-42, yes, is heavily represented by manufacturers because there are dues associated with membership to actively participate. And by actively participate is to make contributions, to make suggestions, and to have them weighed and included in the documents. Once we draft the documents, to become a standard, ANSI requires us to put it for public approval. There's a guy that we both know and love, John Adams, who taught me my OSP course. And he's semi-retired, but an absolute wealth of information. So his public input is always welcome. And so when we open up the OSP document, we have a process through TIA to get public input. And there's another person doing it right now with security, where they don't necessarily want to become a full TIA member, but they're very interested in a specific standard. So to get consensus, to add things into the document outside of the public comment period, you have to be a member, you have your committee, you have to attend 3 meetings in a row before you can become quorum. So you might have 100 members of TIA, which is probably a good number for member organizations. And in your subcommittee, say it's commercial office building, you might have 60 or 80 companies, organizations that contribute and attend regularly. To conduct business, you always require 2/3 of that quorum of that 80 people, right? You have 100 people total membership, 80 that participate all the time. In order to have a meeting, you have to have 60% of the people there.
And is that physically there, or can that be on a phone call too?
Oh, no, they can be on a phone call too.
Okay.
So we have a combination of in-person and hybrid meetings or pure virtual. And we used to be all in person, but then COVID forced us to go all virtual. So now we've been having hybrid. And up until the end of 2026, all the meetings will be hybrid. And they're deciding for 2027 if they're going to make some pure virtual, some pure in-person. But what I've heard through the new leadership is that they're exploring options so that if we make an in-person requirement for 1 or 2 meetings, that it won't be onerous, that you won't lose your quorum membership, if that makes sense.
Yeah. So let me ask you a question. And so our industry changes at the speed of light. That's one of the reasons I love this industry. What we were doing 5 years ago may not even be a valid installation process now, right? I mean, we're always changing. And that drives us as installers and techs in the field to always be constant learners, right? So from the time something is identified to need to be put in the standard, when they do what's called call for interest, right? From the time that call for interest is done to the time they actually publish the standard. And I'm saying this because as I'm talking about this, I'm thinking about the extended distance when we're working on. We'll talk more about that later on. But from the time that call of interest happens to the time that standard is published, are we talking about 6 months, 2 years? How long is that process?
So it can be as long as years. So let's use the example. So for ANSI, they require you to either reaffirm, renew, or modify a standard every 5 years. And if there's reasons why you can't do it within 5 years, you can ask for an exception. There's nothing stopping you from going less than 5 years. There's been a number of cases where we've done less than 5 years and realized that a full-blown standard like brand new, might take a year or 2 to develop. So you might be talking a year or 2 in development and then a 5-year publishing standpoint. If you're looking at something that was, for example, a 2021 standard, some of that information may be from 2019. And I don't want that to worry you, because that's for a full-blown standard, and that's the life cycle. But if there's something important, and we'll use the example of, and I know we'll talk about it later, with extended distance over balanced twisted pair. It was brought up as a study group 2 sessions ago. Last meeting it was, okay, we've got to write a bulletin. So a bulletin's slightly different from a standard, but we'll get into those nuances when we talk about that. That's going out for call for comments now. We'll be reviewing that in June. In June, it'll probably go out for an approval ballot if all goes well. And if the group has done their homework, and I don't mean that in a denigrating way, if they've anticipated all the potential challenges and we can get through them in the call for comments in this section, and then in the approval ballot, recognize everything and get the wording right, we could actually publish it in a year by approving it for publication in the fall meetings.
Gotcha.
So there are ways to make things done quickly, and if it's something that's not controversial, like for example, like say for some reason we waved the magic wand and we had a magic unicorn that could make whatever limitation doubled, and everybody agreed to it, and it wasn't contentious, we could do it. We don't have to wait for the meetings. We can. This is the beauty of doing things remotely. We could have an administrative ballot and say, hey, here's this thing, and we want to do it, and we think it's going to be not contentious at all. We want to make an addendum to one of the standards, and it's a no-brainer. And it's like, okay, great. So that would have to, the administration part of the ballot could be done as little as 2 weeks. And then if we had approval to work on it, we could work on it. It was something as simple as changing it to 2x. The only limiting factor is that ANSI requires us to have it open for a 45-day ballot to make it an ANSI-approved document. So after that, we could again do it by email. So if you had this magic idea and we came up with it on the show today, we could have it published through administrative purposes. If it was not contentious, we could have it done in as little as 2 or 3 months. That's the other side of the coin. Rarely happens because, as you know, technology isn't that simple.
No, and we have a whole bunch of opinionated people in this industry too. So couple those two together, not a current company excluded from that, right? But you and I both know there's some very opinionated people in this industry, and it causes problems all the time, right? So now that we understand TR-42 in the committee, let's talk about. I saw a post, I think it was on LinkedIn. Don't hold me to that, and I think it was like 2 weeks ago, 3 weeks ago, maybe 4 weeks ago, because time flies. It kind of blurs together sometimes. You were attending one of the meetings. What came out of those recent meetings?
Yeah, so we met the first week of February in it was supposed to be sunny Greenville, South Carolina. It ended up being snowy Greenville, South Carolina. And there's a few things that are of interest to your audience. So especially for this, whether it's the specifiers or the installers, we talked about the different specifications. And remember, we had generic specifications. Well, this is how you generically do a cabling system. Now I'm going to smash it, and this is how you're going to do it for commercial. This is how you're going to do it for industrial, data centers, healthcare, whatever. And we had the 568.0 and 568.1 documents, and we had all this sort of generic wording, like, distributor A, B, and C, subsection, cabling subsystem 1, 2, and 3, and it got confusing for people. So there's an effort underway to consolidate 568.0, which is generic, .1, which is commercial, 862, which is building automation systems and smart buildings, and smash them all together into being one reference document. It's going to be confusing. And it'll be an adjustment, but hopefully it'll make sense. And then we take, because that'll cover most of the world. And then we have the specialty stuff, whether it's residential or healthcare or data centers or industrial, and we'll manage those exceptions. So that's the really big item. And I'm going to do this in reverse order because I know you want to talk about this. So next I'll talk about, so there's a lot of activity going on in data centers and polarity for fiber, making sure transmit talks to receive. Mm-hmm. And now that we have single, everybody was always looking at it as a duplex world where it was just 2 fibers, transmit to receive, that's fine. What do you do when it's 8? What do you do when it's 16? What do you do when it's 1? What do you do when it's, you'll hear this thing called shuffles for AI where it's theoretically 8 fibers, 4 transmit and 4 receives in a channel. And so you have that repeated. So there's, one channel of 800 gig and another channel of 800 gig. But now instead of this channel and this channel being separate, what a shuffle is, you'll have this one talking to this one and this one talking to this one. It gets really complex. It gets really messed up. And you've got a lot of really smart people in there that are trying to figure out an eloquent way to do it, and they're trying to do that. There's also discussion about AI data centers and how to do that. A lot of that work's being done in the international standards. And so we collaborate. TIA, BICSI, ISO. We collaborate. We share what we're doing. We input into multiple places. So for AI data centers, a lot of the work is being done in international right now, while the TR-42 committee catches up on that other work that I talked about, that taking 568.0, 568.1, and 862 and smashing into one document. That takes up a lot of time. So they can't work on everything. The other big one, especially for your installers and the users, right? Because everything's about, we talked about, codes, standards, best practices, manufacturing guidelines, then your specifications, which is all covered by the umbrella of what does the customer need? What do they need to accomplish? And so a hot topic in our industry is extended reach, right?
Ding, 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 ding,
ding, ding, ding, ding, ding, ding, ding. And that is a very divisive topic. And I don't think it should be. I really don't. I think there's a lot of myths, misunderstandings, and I think it helps if we step back. So, sneak peek, we've got a document number. It's not ready to be published. It's TSB 5073. And it's going out for its first call for comments, which means it's only available to the committee members. Because we want to polish it.
Right.
Like if you're putting your novel out there, your storyboard for your movie, you don't want to put the first draft out there for everybody to see, and they'll go, they'd probably look at Star Wars and go, that's the stupidest idea ever. Who would ever want to do that? And they would kill it.
Yep.
But they bring it to the polish, and then it becomes this worldwide sensation. Maybe a little bit of an over-exaggeration, but I'm kind of hoping that extended distance stuff and extended reach will really be that sort of thing. So we're going to create a TSB. It's going out for call for comments. By June, we'll be resolving that. And like I said, if all goes well, we'll put that out for an approval ballot, which means it could be approved as early as this fall as a technical systems or technical services bulletin.
Right. Well, I'm glad to hear that, because there are certain ways you can start arguments between low voltage installers and designers, pass through versus traditional mod ends, right? Tie wraps versus Velcro. But now the latest one is extended distance cabling, Well, but I only got a camera that only needs 100 meg. Why can't I go beyond that 100 meters? And oh man, I'm glad we got at least some document to reference now,
right?
Which is
And my only wish. So a technical service bulletin is an informative document. It means you should do something. If you want to go over distance, you should do this. It's not prescriptive. Thou shall do this, which is what a standard is. I pushed for a normative document, which would have been an addendum to 568.3. But again, based on healthy consensus, everybody thought the best course of action was to become a TSB, which means it would be informative guidance. It doesn't stop it from becoming standard later. So, for example, one of the other things I didn't talk about in that smashing of 568, we're talking about taking the wireless and DAS TSBs, which were informative, and making them normative. So, if there's enough need for it, we can do it. And it's funny because you're right. I'll talk to people and they will get so up in arms about it that they can be best buddies. But, on the issue of extended reach, they can become the Hatfields and the McCoys.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. Oh, my gosh. On more than one occasion, I've seen good friends literally almost come fisticuffs.
Yeah, but let me ask you this, right? And I love to step back, and this is what, leadership in standards has helped me, is you can stand back and you can observe things to try and build that consensus. You design fiber and copper systems, right?
Yeah, yeah.
How far can you go with fiber?
Single mode, you can go up to, well, almost 50 miles without having to be repeated. It depends on the bandwidth.
Your application, you put good, hard work into designing your fiber systems.
Yeah. There was an article came out a few months back. I think it was in Japan. They successfully transmitted 1.02 petabytes of data across 800 miles of single mode fiber.
Right. So, are you confident that you can deliver a signal over single mode over 100 meters knowing what you know, Chuck?
100%.
You can do it over a kilometer, right?
100%.
You can do it over 10 kilometers if you have to with the right equipment and the right design and materials choices, right?
And bandwidth requirements, absolutely.
Okay. And I'm going to be absolutely sarcastic. So this is me dialing up my sarcasm button to 10 or 11.
Okay.
I'm going to go up to 11 here. How come when it comes to copper, all that good intelligence and experience and expertise you have flies out the window when it's copper? It's like, oh my God, I can't do this anymore.
Right.
People will talk about physics and gauge size and everything else as it applies to copper. And that's very true. But it also, the same physics, instead of electrons, it's photons on the fiber side. So it's funny. I think we just got to wrap our head around it. And I think this is part of the challenge. You know, this is what I've observed over the years, is we've looked at standards too much of, it's kind of like people that rely on AI. And it's just, well, AI said it so therefore it's true. But really it's the knowledge, the context, the experience, the wisdom that we apply. That makes these AI tools, these machine learning tools, valuable. And it's the same thing here, Chuck. It really is. We have to go more than 100 meters. And if we over rely on punch lists, the reason we have a 100-meter limit for a channel and a 90-meter permanent link have nothing to do with photons or electrons or gauge sizes. Actually, technically, it's gauge size of cable. And I think I've told this story to you before, but it's less to do about the capabilities of Ethernet or token ring or BACnet or any one of these low voltage applications you run on your twisted pair cabling. The history of the 90-meter limit is more to do with the way we designed our commercial office buildings back in the 80s when we came up with these guidelines. And the typical floor plate of 25,000 square feet, having one electrical room per floor. And, you'd have one electrical room per floor because to deliver your 20 amp circuit over 120, you needed a 12 gauge cable, and that dictated how big of a floor plate you could have per electrical room. And because it was an emerging industry, we put our equipment in electrical rooms, which means our 90-meter distance had more to do with voltage drop for AC systems than anything else. And it just sort of evolved for that. And we've iterated.
See, I was told that it was because of propagation delay. That was why we were stuck with that 150.
That impacts jitter and that impacts delay skew, but you can fix jitter and delay skew with a better designed cable, better balance. That's why I always call it about balanced twisted pair. True,
and that's what I tell people all the time. And as a general rule of thumb, when people, I heard this probably for 40 plus years since I got in this industry, and you probably heard it once or twice too. Copper's dying; it's going away. Yeah. And here we are, still installing copper, still installing it, and now we're doing distance speeds that was once reserved only for fiber, and we're able to do it across copper.
But the same thing with fiber. Remember when fiber first came on the market, it was like, oh, it's the death of copper, and fiber can do anything you want. And now all of a sudden we're finding all these limitations on insertion loss, return loss, cleanliness. You have all these polarity issues with all these different schemata for things. And guess what's coming up? Because you've heard of hollow core fiber and multi-core fiber.
Yep.
Guess what one of the biggest technical, and again, don't ask me, I can get you a PhD to interview. All I know is one of the biggest technical issues, besides orienting the strands of fiber to make sure if I'm supposed to talk this way, I'm not this way. I've got to make sure that is there. But now having multiple cores in the same glass, guess what one of the number one criteria is they have to overcome? Optical crosstalk.
Oh, wow. I never even thought about that.
And if you want, I'll find you a real expert that can explain it much better than I.
Yeah, that sounds like a good future. But let me ask you this before you reach out to that person, because you and I talked about this in a separate conversation before. Sometimes PhDs and engineers don't make the best guests.
Oh, and that's why we've got to find you the best one. So all this to be said is people are afraid, and so I see it in the committee, and I'm not going to name names of who's in the copper committee, but people are saying, there's a lot of variability between the transceivers and the PHYs. So I think I could do this instead of 100 meters. I think I can do 130 or 150 or 200 or 2,000. I don't care what the number is. Mm-hmm. I think I can do this, and you'll see a lot of people rightfully putting in some caution about the variability of those transceivers and saying, hey, maybe the best way is to do a field test. And I always recommend a field test. And by a field test, I mean proper bit error rate testing, not just a ping test. Do I get a link light?
A qualification test.
I can hear you. I may not understand anything you say, but I can hear you. That's kind of a ping test. So they're all worried about that, and that's why they didn't want. That was the argument for not making it normative. So I backed off. It's just like, okay, I hear you.
And that's one of the things I really loved about the whole game changer cable thing. People love them, people hate them. There's two distinct camps when it comes to game changer cable. But the thing that I love about that conversation is it got us thinking outside the box.
Absolutely.
That's what I liked about the whole conversation.
Always make a rule, and you always make the exceptions, and I embrace that. But you have to do it with your eyes wide open. And so the people that are overly fear-mongering, I think they're rightful to be fearful. And the people that are saying, oh my God, there's nothing wrong with it, I also agree with it. I think there's nothing wrong with bending the rules. But the people that tend to be extremists on either one of those camps, I think if we can bring them together, we can do this, because we do this every day with fiber. We do this every day with copper. So the 100-meter limit, arguably, and the same thing with 4 connectors. You're allowed 100 meters, 4 connectors. It doesn't mean that 3 connectors is good, 5 connectors bad. It just means you better be able to support at least 4. There's use cases where I've shown where you need 5, 6, 7. I've seen use cases where they need 10 concatenated connectors in a copper channel over 100 meters, and everybody's blowing their minds. It's like, oh my God, you're breaking standards. It's like, no, I'm not breaking them. I'm exceeding them.
Right, and that's where the whole conversation is. Understanding the customer requirements kind of trumps sometimes what the standards say. Because again, I'll go back to the extended reach stuff, right? Because when that company came out with their extended reach cabling, it was marketed for people putting in cameras way out in left field, right? And that camera's only using 100 meg. Well, we can do 10. Well, we can do 40 gig to 98 feet, but we can do 10 gig to 100 meters. But if you use 100 meg of that, you can go further distances.
Yeah. Well, and remember, these networks now step down, like from 10 to 5 to 2.5 to 1, depending on the transceiver. From 10 to 1, from 1 to 100 to 10 meg, right? And so everybody has a different requirement, and embrace that, because too often the standards have been written around, like, so you're an RCDD, I'm an RCDD. Oh my God, your telecom rooms shall be in the center of the building and they shall be stacked. Because,
right.
cabling is the center of the universe. Everybody else revolves around me. I'll tell you from personal experience, I love to celebrate failures. I'll give you one of my biggest failures. I did that in an airport where I put enough telecom rooms in there to make sure everything was under a 90-meter permanent link. Everything was stacked. And thank God the electrical, architectural, and mechanical engineers and architects liked me because I was on the 30th floor of the building when I proposed my design, and I think they were, if I'd really pushed it, they would have thrown me out the window. Because an airport doesn't care about telecom.
No.
They care about moving airplanes, bags,
people.
and people in that order. Airplanes can't crash. Bags got to get there. People got to get there too. They don't really care about the people because if you miss the flight, they're going to charge you extra, or they'll put a Starbucks in the way while you're being delayed, and you're going to be happy.
Yeah, and then sell you a $25 cup of coffee. It's really worth $2.
Absolutely. But you don't tell an airport that, hey, because this, again, celebrating my failures. And if Al Lyons ever listens to your podcast, he'll laugh because he'll remember trying to talk me out of it and giving me the hard lesson. You do not stack telecom rooms in an airport and tell the baggage handling people, you'll just have to move the baggage handling line.
Yeah,
that did not go over well.
Imagine that.
Same token, so back to length. So if you think about it, what's you have your airport terminal, and then coming off every airport terminal at every gate is a jet bridge, and they're variable in length, right? And they can be 50 meters long. Some of them for some of the big airplanes. And what do you have at the end? You have a remote control to control that jetway bridge, and you have a phone and maybe a terminal and maybe some sensors. So if I'm going to be if I'm going to be limited to that 90-meter permanent length, and my jet bridge is 50 meters long, and I'm 50 meters between jet bridges, guess what? I need a telecom room and jet bridge.
Right.
And that's exactly what I designed, being the good newly minted RCDD. And there's nothing, and I'm not denigrating the RCDD. That was the best decision I ever made. But I didn't put the context in to look at it from the customer perspective.
Right.
So for a 100-gate airport, I had 100 gates, just 100 telecom rooms just for the gates, plus the other 50 for the building. And it's just like, this is ridiculous. Some of your telecom rooms only have 5 or 6 cables. And
real estate comes at a premium, especially in airports. Let me ask you this, because there's I always get questions about what I call fake terms, right? Chuck, what about Cat 6E? What about Cat 5 Little E versus Cat 5 Big E? Or Chuck, what about future rated cables? How does the standard address that misinformation or those non-standard things? So, awesome feedback. We get that a lot. And so people say, well, how come standards doesn't call out things you can't do? So there is no 5 capital E. 5E is always lowercase. Right. 6A is always uppercase. There is no such thing as a 6E or a 5 big E. There's no such thing as a 5I or a 6I, something you didn't mention, but I've heard mentioned because it's industrial. So this is where it's important to pay attention to those handbooks, pay attention to what's going into standards. The rest of it's marketing. And so, although I don't mind the idea of marketing that, hey, this is I because it's specially designed to go in an industrial environment, great. But you shouldn't call it a 5I or a 6I. Same thing with a 6E versus a 6A. The dirty little secret of 6A is 6A because no one could agree to what to call it. So there was a TIA meeting where there was a happy hour and everybody gave up their ideas, and it was just like, I want 6, like literally it was Cat 7. Oh, we can't have it Cat 7 because IEEE's got it. Okay, let's call it Cat 8. Well, we can't call it Cat 8 because it's not better than Cat 7. Okay, well, maybe we should change it from A's to B's, and let's call it 6E and 6X, and let's get rid of the nomenclature. And really what it came down to was they argued themselves out. Because I was in that meeting, and it was free beer and a popcorn that I was gladly eating because I wasn't working for a manufacturer at the time. I was working for a systems integrator, and I'm eating popcorn watching this go on and getting these people all upset. So 6A is, people will say it means augmented. And really that comes around the TSBs. So it's like, hey, if you want to go beyond Cat 6, you have to augment the performance. Right. So that's where the 6A came from. It's funny that you say that because while I've never, I can't say I have participated in the standards. When I used to work for Ingalls McCoy, I was the representative for H&M on the TI for a short period of time. But I spent a lot of time on Bixie committees helping write the the best practice manuals and stuff. And some of the argument, you're right. It's like, just get the popcorn. It's a show. And I've heard that the acronym TBBIBC, which is a really old acronym, it's not one that's even used anymore. TBBIBC, Telecommunications Bonding Backbone Interconnecting Bonding Conductor, was, and I can neither confirm nor deny this, but I heard that they coined that at a happy hour because they couldn't come up with a good name for it.
Well, and this is the consensus. And you know what? As much as it's funny, it's an anecdotal story. It's encouragement to join because it's a lot of fun, despite the fact that we're all nerds.
Right.
But B, it gives you more understanding of what goes into the standards and what doesn't get into the standards, and about the consensus. So when you have to make these intelligent decisions, it gives you the ammunition to talk about it. Right. And more importantly, it's like, really when we want to get down to it, is it 6 little a, big A, blah, 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 blah. Do you really want the standards guys focusing on the naming and the nomenclature? I don't want them spending any time on that like that. And when I was chair, I tried to focus on what is meaningful outcomes for people. And that was the same discussion back to your original question. Why don't we specify what you can't do? Well, you can't go and, pull the cable with a pair of vice grips. You can't take an indoor cable and push it through a conduit by putting a fire hose onto it and pushing it with water.
Well, you could.
And I'm using
there's
that
no way in the world you can come up with every scenario
right
that they could come across in the field. There's no way. Let me ask you this question. This is something I've always pondered.
Sure.
And I think I know the answer, but I don't know for a fact. You probably know the answer better than I do. Why does the ANSI standards skip from 6A to 8, and when there's the ISO 7 and 7A? Why do we not have a 7, 7A in our standard?
Because ISO copyrighted 7, and this is why we went from 6 to 6A. So 5 to 5E was an iteration. It was an improvement on, sorry, I got to do it this way. Signal degrades, noise comes up, right? And so the original 5E at 100 megahertz, signal met noise, which means it really wasn't distinguishable. So hopefully I'm showing this the right way in the camera. You had to shift it. That was 5E. Mm-hmm. To take your 100. So when signal met noise, it was beyond 100 megahertz, and that was 5E. So that's why it was an iteration. 6 to 6A was a generational, 250 to 500 megahertz.
Right.
7 was developed before 6A. Okay. And they said, hey, we know that they're going to go beyond a gig, so we need to develop something. So they developed something. That's why the original 7 requirements, because it was completely new exploratory technology and there was no application written for it, they came up with the parameters that they did. TIA took a more measured approach, waited until IEEE said, hey, this is how we're going to make the transceivers, and then figured out, I can make that instead of a 600 or 625, I forget what the original 7 was. We can do that with a 500 megahertz cable with these parameters. So even though Cat 7 is higher than Cat 6A from a number perspective, and you assume from a hierarchical perspective, and definitely from a specified bandwidth, not an actual bandwidth, but a specified bandwidth, it is higher. It's actually an older cable than 6A. 6A was, I like to call it, right-sized for 10 gig applications. And so because ISO had copyrighted the term Cat 7, and it was tied to that performance level, and Cat 6A, even though it was newer and written for the application, it didn't meet it, so you couldn't call it Cat 7.
Okay.
And then you couldn't call it Cat 8 because it would imply the wrong thing, and that's what caused that whole hullabaloo about what the heck to call it.
Because I get asked that question a lot. Why is it not 7 or 7A in the ANSI? I get asked that question quite often, and now that makes sense because I think Cat 7 now is 600 megahertz, and I think Cat 7A is 1,000 megahertz. But
yeah, it gets weird with all of these things because now that you're going to 1.4 gigabit or whatever, and you have 30 minute limits, whatever, like, and there was a category 8 within TIA,
right?
And I forget what it gave you, but category 8, for example, is a paper tiger. I've never seen it implemented in the field. I've seen it.
Right. No, same here. I mean, it's out there. It's in the standards. We can do 40 gig up to is it 30 meters, I think? Yeah, which is 98.4 feet or something like that. I think it's really more designed for data centers than it is more for commercial office cabling. But the funny thing is again, you put people on the internet, they all of a sudden become subject matter experts in stuff they know nothing about, and you'll see, well, I'm getting Cat 8 cable for my home network. You don't need Cat 8.
And this is the danger, and this is where your technicians and your contractors have to be careful. Sometimes they're bidding on things like it used to be popular, where people would say, "Hey, I want you to install the highest rated category cable available at the time," and that's like, whoa,
right?
Time out.
Look at the whole picture. Look at the whole picture, not just
danger. Will Robinson, danger. Like, don't say it. Like I had a hospital say that. It says, no, you have to put in category 8. It's like, okay, I'll put in category 8 for you. You're going to hold me, and I worked for a very large systems integrator at the time. You're going to hold me responsible for category 8. That's fine. You're going to make me eat the millions of dollars. I would work for a big integrator. It would hurt, but yes, we'd absolutely absorb it. But do you realize what you've now done? And they said, well, what do you mean? What have I done? I'm holding you to your contract. It's like, well, wait. We worked on a 100-meter channel with a 90-meter permanent link. Now you want me to put in category 8, which means I'm not going to have a 100-meter channel. I'm going to have a 30-meter channel. Right. And because a typical hospital is about 4 meters up and down, that's about an effective 20-meter permanent link. Right. And so just by rough numbers, you're going to need about 20 times more telecommunications rooms. So fine, you're going to make me eat the category 8. You're going to make me install it. I'll do it. But in order for you to do that, you've now got to change your pathway design and your rooms and give me 20 times more telecom rooms in the facility.
And you got to give up floor space, and customers hate.
And then all of a sudden say, oh, wait, maybe I don't want that. It's like, that's what I tried to tell you.
Right. So we're running short on time, so let's go and shift into the last section. Here's the big question, right? Our industry doesn't stand still, neither do the standards, right? So the technology, it definitely doesn't stay still with us, and that always drives us kicking and screaming to the future. So the person who might be listening to this podcast episode, or they might come across us and ask about it, how can they get involved with this? How can they get involved with ANSI? Do you have to be an RCDD? Do you have to have 40 years of experience?
Nope. One of the people I most recommend in the industry, and will remain nameless, started working in a consulting engineering firm by happenstance, but was very interested in standards. So they attended the meetings and represented their organization and their firm quite well, and have become one of the preeminent subject matter experts. I started with standards, in the last century, because I heard industrial automation, industrial Ethernet was coming, and the standards guys were working on it, and I just showed up. So reach out to whatever standards body it is, right? So like Cindy's in charge of TIA. Reach out to her; she'll introduce you to the people at TIA. You've got guys like Pat Mahoney, who's chair of the Bixby initiative. Reach out to him; he'll introduce you to the right people. There's Brian Salella of Seaman, who is the U.S. TAG representative. Remember, it's one vote per country into the international ISO standards. So he's the head of the U.S. TAG. He can tell you how to participate that way. Volunteers are welcome, but you got to be committed. So typically, for example, for leadership in TIA, just to attend, you can attend once you get through your membership thing. But once you get into leadership, they ask for a letter of support from your organization, and I encourage people to support. There's an absolutely brilliant guy, Bob Faber, who works for DLB Accenture now, who's participated
for many years.
Yeah, and so now he's participating in TIA, and he's participating in leadership. So leadership is included. So you can go to any one of those websites, but I name drop either Cindy or Pat or Brian, or reach out to myself or you, Chuck, and we can point them in the right way. Because you don't have to be a subject matter expert on how to. I don't know how to make a Category 6A cable. I work for a vendor, but don't ask me how we make our fiber. Don't ask me how we make our copper. I have no clue. I'm a premise guy. I'm a design guy. I'm an installer. I cut my teeth being an installer, right? So now I go and help with design, and I help with owners to make the right decision. So I'm like an advisor for a decision-making criteria. Doesn't mean I can't participate in standards, because you can look at things like that makes sense or that doesn't make sense, and you can help steer the direction. Because by the same token, when you see these guys with these people with multiple PhDs that are designing the fibers, they're designing the copper cables, they've never pulled a cable.
Never pulled cable day in their lives, and they don't understand.
There are people that have never stepped foot in a data center, but you have.
Right.
You've built a hospital. You've built an airport.
So if someone does join, can they join as an individual? That's my first question. And if not, what is the time commit on a monthly basis? How many hours as a volunteer, not necessarily in leadership, but as a volunteer, how many hours a month do you think that the ANSI is going to expect them to participate?
So it's not, ANSI is the accreditation body for TIA. So TIA meets 3 times a year. Typical meetings are about 4 hours a piece. You'll probably have, because you and I were talking about, investments when you do this. So if you look at your 4-hour meeting time, per meeting, per subcommittee, right? But they meet for the whole week. So if you're involved, if you're a systems integrator or a person that wants to be involved with everything, and you're meeting for 40 hours that week, expect a 4x investment outside of those meetings. But if you want to just participate, for example, in extended reach, that's about a 4-hour meeting. So expect your 4-hour meeting 3 times a year, and probably a 4x investment outside of that to review the documents, to review the contributions, and decide how you want to do that. And it's not all it's not all the standards taking. The standards give so much back to you.
Because it's like Bixie committees, same
right,
thing.
If you participate in Bixie, you participate in TIA, please do, because it's not just about the things you need. You can read the book to find out what's in the TDMM. You can read 568 to find out what's in it. But what engagement gives you is participation, and it gives you the relationships. It's there's more things, far more things that I don't know than I do. But what I do know is I know who to call, not necessarily to get to the answer, but to get closer to the answer and closer to the answer and closer to the answer every single time.
And one of the biggest advantages I came across when I was on the TIA committee meetings when I worked for H&M was your name gets put in the book. And when you're bidding things and it says the work has to meet or exceed the ANSI standards or has to meet or exceed the Bixie best practices, who's going to be more knowledgeable about what's in that than the person who's actually on the committee that helped write that? And here's another thing. If you're out there all complaining about the standards always running behind what we're doing or the standards has it wrong, take a seat at the table and change the industry. That's the key.
Exactly. Thank you,
Mr. Henry. We're right up against our mark here. We had some questions we didn't cover, but I have a feeling this is probably going to be broken into 2 different episodes because lots of great information, and I know I'm going to get lots of comments about this. So I appreciate you coming on, and I appreciate everything that you do for the industry, because people don't realize the time, the energy, and the effort that goes into not only just participating in standards, but like you, leading it for 8 years, 4 years under 2 different committee chairs, subcommittee chair and then the committee chair. That's a lot. And I appreciate you pulling back the curtain so somehow people can understand, why is there not Cat 7 or Cat 7A in ANSI standards?
Well, glad to help anytime. Thank you, Chuck. Love the platform, man.
I appreciate you. Till next time, remember, knowledge is power.
Yes, sir.
Now you know the deal. Subscribe and share the show. Help us spread the real. Stay connected. Do it right. Let's talk cabling. Let's talk cabling.